On the west-facing side of Battle Ridge, stretching between Last Stand Hill and the Little Bighorn River, approximately 50 markers trace an uneven, scattered line. This formation is known as the South Skirmish Line, and it points toward a steep gully known as Deep Ravine. Archaeological findings and accounts from soldiers and indigenous witnesses confirm that combat and fatalities occurred in this area. The issue, however, is that the South Skirmish Line seems to contain an excessive number of markers, while Deep Ravine itself currently has none. This raises the questions: were troopers killed within Deep Ravine, and do their remains lie there still? In the Frontier Army, a soldier's primary identity was tied to his company, more so than his regiment. Your company consisted of the men you were posted with, shared meals with, marched alongside, and lived among. The mindset wasn't, "I'm in the 7th Cavalry," but rather, "I'm in a specific company of the 7th Cavalry." Each company developed its own distinct character and reputation. Notably, the 1876 campaign marked the first occasion in the 7th's history that the entire regiment, all 12 companies, operated together in the field. Earlier, in 1868, just prior to the Battle of the Wachita, Custer had reorganized all his company's horses by their color. While one could argue this served a tactical function by making companies identifiable from afar, Custer primarily instituted the change because he believed it appeared impressive. Notably, the unit mounted on gray horses became famous as the Gray Horse Troop. This detail is significant because during the Little Bighorn fighting, when indigenous witnesses refer to the gray horses, we can identify the specific company they mean. The men of Company E were among the regiment's more seasoned soldiers. Only around 10% had less than a year of Army service. They were under the command of First Lieutenant Algernon Smith and Second Lieutenant James Sturgis. On the morning of June 25th, while advancing toward the Little Bighorn, Custer split his regiment into battalions, specifically into 5 battalions. Major Reno commanded Companies A, G, and M. Captain Benteen led D, H, and K. Captain Miles Keogh took Companies C, I, and L. Captain George Yates was given Companies E and F. Captain Thomas McDougall assumed control of Company B, plus a non-commissioned officer and 6 men from every other company to guard the pack train. In later years, indigenous warriors who fought were interviewed about their recollections of Custer's sector of the battle. These warriors recounted seeing soldiers advancing along Battle Ridge toward the location of the present-day monument. Within this group were men riding gray horses. Multiple warrior accounts describe the gray horses becoming entangled with other mounts at the ridge's extremity, the site now called Last Stand Hill. A contingent of troopers advanced further north than the hill itself, posing a threat to ford the river above the section of the village occupied by the Cheyenne. This group, however, withdrew in the direction of what is now the cemetery and subsequently rejoined the main force on the hill. The soldiers mounted on gray horses then proceeded down the slope toward the river, dismounted, and began a firefight with the warriors. The indigenous fighters managed to drive off the gray horses, separating them from the troopers, and seized many of the animals near the riverbank. Now afoot, these soldiers met several fates. Some were killed where they stood, others fought their way back to Last Stand Hill, and a number ran for the nearest cover they could see, Deep Ravine. Warrior accounts mention at least a few soldiers, possibly as few as 4 or 5, reaching a deep gulch or ravine and being slain there. In all, 39 men from Company E perished. This figure included its 2 officers, 3 sergeants, 4 corporals, 2 trumpeters, and 28 privates. Only 10 of these men could be positively identified. The unit's commander, Lieutenant Smith, was discovered deceased on Last Stand Hill, separated from his men. First Sergeant Frederick Homeyer was identified within the company group by the name sewn into one of his socks. The remains of Second Lieutenant Sturgis were never located, or at least never conclusively recognized. In the aftermath, soldiers tasked with securing the area and conducting burials reported observing several bodies within Deep Ravine. The total count given by these witnesses differed, though the most frequently cited figure was 28. These fallen men were reported as belonging to E Company. 3 years later, during the proceedings of Reno's Court of Inquiry, Captain Miles Moylan, who commanded Company A, provided the following account. After departing that location, I rode up to that point, I believe, alongside Major Reno. Within the ravine marked as H on the map, we discovered upwards of 20 bodies from E Company. They had clearly been engaged in combat while retreating. I could observe the path where they had descended the edge and tried to climb the opposite side, which was nearly vertical. The marks were evident where they had used their hands to ascend, but these traces only reached about halfway up the bank. During that same court of inquiry, Captain Thomas McDougall, commander of Company B, stated, "I proceeded only to the location where I was slain. Major Reno next directed me to assemble my company, proceed to the village, and secure tools for the interment of the deceased. Upon my return, he instructed me to bury Company E, the unit I had personally led for 5 years, and to record the identities of the men where feasible. I located the majority of them within a ravine. To the best of my memory, that is where most of Company E were discovered. Roughly half were situated inside the ravine itself, with the remaining half positioned along a line outside of it. Every man was lying prone, and the nature of their wounds suggested most were shot from the side. My belief is that they put up the strongest resistance possible and were likely assaulted from both flanks. So here's the issue. There are 50-odd markers placed along the south skirmish line with several atop Deep Ravine, yet not a single one is located inside the ravine itself. This presents two explanations regarding the bodies in Deep Ravine. They are either there or they are not. If they were ever there, by what means and for what reason were they relocated? If they were never there, why did the account of their presence become widespread? One hypothesis is that the cavalrymen never occupied Deep Ravine. The ravine mentioned by eyewitnesses may in fact be the wider basin area encompassing the south skirmish line. And certainly one could describe this broad, sloping terrain as a ravine. During the 1980s, a sequence of excavations was conducted within Deep Ravine proper in an attempt to locate any evidence of soldiers. No trace was found. Furthermore, the soldiers who reinterred remains in the years following the battle planted stakes wherever they discovered bodies. No stakes were ever placed inside Deep Ravine. Consider the stone memorials placed a few years later as well. If troopers had fallen in the ravine, it is improbable they were retrieved and buried elsewhere. By the time of their interment, the remains had been exposed for 3 days and were in no state to be transported. The men simply covered the bodies with earth. I'm no expert in geology, but the slope of Deep Ravine's base apparently makes it unlikely that the soldiers' remains were carried away by water toward the river. Therefore, the absence of markers inside Deep Ravine suggests no soldiers ever lay there. That is one interpretation. Conversely, you have the accounts of many individuals, both cavalry and native, who report soldiers dying at a steep geographical depression. Captain McDougall testified in court that half the men from E Company, which he long commanded, were found partly within a ravine and partly outside it. Captain Moylan even recounted seeing marks where soldiers had attempted to scramble up the ravine's sides. Only one location on the battlefield matches that description: Deep Ravine. Period photographs indicate the ravine's edges have eroded somewhat since the 1870s. Perhaps the remains lie buried deeper than initially believed. Archaeological digs near the markers along the rim of Deep Ravine have uncovered numerous bullets and shell casings. Given the volume of first-hand testimony, it is difficult to entirely dismiss the possibility that bodies remain within the ravine. So, what is the conclusion? I cannot say for certain, but I am interested in your opinion. Please share your thoughts in a comment below on what you believe became of the Greyhorse troop, and remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable notifications.